What's up, C27? This is Riley Newton, the high school pastor here at the Orchard Tupelo. I hope that you have made yourself at home at your host homes, that you've gotten a snack, that you said hey to some friends, that you've high-fived a leader, because right now we're about to go into a teaching video, and this teaching video is going to be a little bit different. First of all, this teaching video is in space. Welcome. It's really exciting here. If you're wondering how I'm teaching without an astronaut helmet, it's because this is totally just the background at the Orchard. But me and Bjorn thought that it would be an awesome idea to take the opportunity to shoot this video in space, because how often do you have that opportunity, right? Tonight we're going to be talking about John the Baptist. We're going to be starting the series looking at how John points us to how we can live a Jesus-filled life. I'm really excited about it because John the Baptist is one of my favorite people in the Bible. Every chance that I get, I love to get to teach about him. And so this video is going to be just a little bit different than normal. We're going to break it down into 3 parts where you get to watch a teaching, you get to do some small group, you get to watch the next part of the teaching, you get to do some small group. And hopefully that just breaks it down into a way that you don't have to try to remember for 15 minutes what it is that I said that stuck out to you, but that you can just watch these short little segments and you can find something that God is trying to show you tonight. So before we get started, pause the video, pray with the small group leader, and then we're going to jump right into it. I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you learn something from it. So who here in your host homes loves opening packages? Now, I know Christmas was just a few weeks ago, and so that's fresh on our mind. And don't get me wrong, I love to open packages on Christmas. I've got a 6-year-old little brother, and opening packages with him on Christmas morning was one of the most fun things that I've done this year. Some people love to open birthday packages, and I think birthday packages are pretty cool too. You know, you get to go home after a long day at school or after a weekend, and you get to spend time with the people that you love the most. Maybe you get to go out to dinner and you come home and you get to open some things just because you lived another year. I think birthday packages are pretty great too. But I think out of all of the packages in all of my life that I've ever opened, that Amazon packages are my absolute favorite. It doesn't matter what I order, but as soon as I order that that thing from Amazon, I can't wait for it to show up at my door, right? But the only problem is those 2 days feel like an eternity. As soon as I click the order button, I'm trying to figure out how far it is before it gets to me. How many days do I have to wait? As I'm waiting, I can't help but picture whatever it is that I'm waiting for in my hands. Like, can't wait to get my hands on it and use it. And finally, the day when it arrives, when the UPS man walks up to the door and rings the doorbell, it takes everything that I have in me to not run out there and hug the guy because I'm so excited that my package has finally come in. And so I take the package off the porch, I bring it into the kitchen, and it's not like you know, some people need scissors and they need like box cutters to open up their packages. Not me. It's like you're watching the Animal Planet or something, like a nature documentary. Like, I see the package on the table and it like wastes no time. I mean, it's like a lion like devouring its prey. I'm like opening up that package, doing everything I can to get into it and finally see what I've been waiting for. 2 days feels like so long that we can't hardly bear it. But that wait, it brings us excitement. It brings us something to look forward to. It gives us a purpose to long for. A long time ago, the Bible tells us a story about the Israelites. And as we read the Bible, the story of the Israelites is almost throughout the entire Old Testament. And throughout this story, God does all sorts of things for these people because He's the one who's chosen to reveal His love to the world through. Throughout the Old Testament, we see where God has blessed the Israelites. He gives them things that they had no idea that they even needed. He frees them from slavery in Egypt. And as they're walking through the desert to get to their new homeland, He feeds them every single day with bread that comes from heaven. Whenever they finally get to their homeland, He helps them win battles to conquer these cities that they can go and they can live in. And every chance that He had, God tried to show them how much He loved them. But there was only one problem. The Israelites didn't reciprocate it. They didn't do the same thing back for God. Whenever God blessed them with things, the Israelites complained and asked for more. When God led them out of slavery in Egypt, all they did was complain and ask to please go back to Egypt in slavery because it was way better than life in the desert. When God fed them bread from heaven, manna, They begin to complain and they ask for God to send them meat instead. And so God sent pigeons that they could collect every morning. Whenever God asked them to conquer these villages and these cities, they would go and they would conquer, but instead of peacefully dwelling in them, they would take over and they would pillage and they would destroy these cities instead. And whenever God showed them how much He loved them through His word, the people ignored them. And so over and over again, we see this happen throughout the Old Testament, and finally God decides that if the Israelites aren't going to listen, then He's just going to go silent. And so for 400 years, God doesn't speak to the Israelite people. He doesn't say a word, He doesn't move, He's still there, but He's quiet. And can you imagine what it would feel like to be an Israelite in that moment? I mean, can you imagine the God who's been with you this entire time is finally not blessing you anymore? Can you imagine what it would feel like to wonder where God had gone and when He would be back? And so the remaining few Christians, the ones that still followed God, well, at that point they wouldn't have been Christians. They would have just been Israelites. They would have been followers of God. But the faithful few began to read the passages of Scripture that they had in Isaiah, where Isaiah spoke of someone who would come soon, someone who would bring hope. But when would it happen? It's been 400 years. So take some time in small group for a second and talk about what it would be like to feel that tension, to wonder when God would be back, to wonder when God would speak again. After waiting for what felt like an eternity, all 400 years, suddenly for the Israelites, there's hope. Word on the street is that there's this guy out in the Judean wilderness talking about somebody who's coming who's greater than he is. Can you imagine how exciting that would be? After you've waited all of this time and after you've heard these stories passed down from grandparent to parent, from generation to generation, there's all of a sudden a chance to go and see what God is doing. That's why Jesus coming, why John the Baptist coming is good news, because when the Israelite people were lost without God, whenever He was silent, He didn't forsake them. He set a better plan in motion. And we pick up with that plan, this story right here in Mark 1, verses 1 through 8. This is the good news about Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God. It began just as the prophet Isaiah had written, just like we talked about earlier. Look, I'm sending you my messenger ahead of you, and he will prepare your way. He's a voice shouting in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord is coming. Clear the road for Him. This messenger was John the Baptist. He was in the wilderness and he preached that people should be baptized to show that they had repented of their sins and turned to God to be forgiven. All of Judea, including all the people of Jerusalem, went out to see and hear John. And when they confessed their sins, he baptized them in the Jordan River. His clothes were woven from coarse camel hair, and he wore a leather belt around his waist. For food, he ate locusts and wild honey. John announced, someone is coming soon who's greater than I am, so much greater that I'm not even worthy to stoop down like a slave and untie the straps of his sandals. I baptize you with water, but he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. The good news, the gospel, is that God is finally up to something again through John the Baptist. All of these people from all over Jerusalem and Judea would have heard what John was teaching about, and they would have rushed out. They would have traveled to go see what he was up to. They would have hiked out into the desert, into the wilderness, through the mountains and all of the dusty roads to travel out to hear what this prophet was saying. And finally, after days and days of travel, after hours of hiking, because all you had back then was camels and donkeys and your feet to walk. There were no cars, there were no planes. To get out there would have been a trek. And finally, these people, they crest the hill and they begin to see a crowd forming down by the Jordan River. And so they start to walk down to this crowd. It's like a concert. As they're walking up to the concert, they're trying to make their way through the crowd, pushing people aside, doing everything they can to get up to the front. And finally, after shoving through all of these stinky, smelly people, they finally bust out into the part where they can see John. And finally, they lay their eyes on the person that they've been waiting for so long. Except for there was only one problem. this guy was not the guy that they had expected. This guy can't be a prophet. He looks like a hillbilly. Did you read the description? This guy can't be holy. He looks like a hick. This guy can't be godly. He can't, there's nothing that this guy could say. He looks like he's from Duck Dynasty. But even though John looked like a hillbilly, he had an important message that we can't miss, even now in 2019, that someone is coming who's greater than John is. My favorite thing about John the Baptist is he's got this message. He's one of the most important messengers ever in the world. And he doesn't boast about it. He doesn't get a big head. He doesn't get gassed up whenever he knows that he has this good news and that he's the only one that knows about it. No. Instead, John keeps his message simple. He says exactly what he needs to in this moment, that someone is coming who's greater than I am. I mean, if I was in that position, I can't imagine what it would feel like to have all those crowds travel all of that way to just hear the things that I was saying. Yet John remains humble. He does what God has called him to do. And he says, just wait and see what God is going to do in your lives through this man called Jesus Christ. Can you see what's happening? Can you see the excitement? Can you feel the joy that this story is bringing to all of these people? Because all of history, the entire Bible up to this point, is leading up to this moment. Through Jesus, God is alive. And just a few weeks ago at Christmas, we celebrated that God's story isn't boring, that it's not something that we can never attain, but that God put everything that he was into a baby so that he might grow up, show us what it looks like to live for God, that he would die on a cross, be crucified and buried, and then raised back up into life, pouring out his Spirit to us so that we can join in the same mission that God called him to. Jesus even says in the Gospels that we're going to do greater things than he ever did. Is that not mind-blowing? If that doesn't get us excited, then I don't know what to tell you, because I think some of us in this room at your host homes tonight have settled for a boring, watered-down version of Christianity. That we've settled to going to church 1 hour a week, or maybe 2 hours if we go to church on Wednesday. We decided that we're going to keep God in a little box instead of letting God have the fullness of our lives. We want people to think that we're a good person while we're at church, so we say the right things and we do the things that we know is going to get us the most attention, but then when we get back home, when we go into the shadows, we act like the person that we truly are. Some of us have decided that we want the spotlight and we're just going to let Jesus stay on the fringes. But what we see in John the Baptist's story is that that's not what God calls us to do. That God calls us to offer our entire lives, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's hard, to humble ourselves like a servant and say, someone is coming. Someone in my life is greater than I am, and that's Jesus. I think there's a lot of ways that we can do this. The first one that comes to mind is through our activities. God has blessed us all with unique gifts and abilities, and if you don't know what those are, I would ask that you pray that God would show you those things, because he's given you unique gifts that only you have. And because of that, there's only people that you can show the love of Jesus to, that God has uniquely called you, like John the Baptist, to preach that someone is out there who's greater than you are. And everything you do, whether it's academics, whether it's sports, whether it's video games, whether it's band, whatever it is, that every time you do that thing, that you thank God for the opportunity and you use that as a moment to say, hey, you know what? I might be pretty decent at this, but the reason I am is because of God. I think for too long in my life that I had settled and I thought that following Jesus was only about following the rules. That I would set out to be perfect, and as soon as I failed, as soon as I fell, I would beat myself up and I would wonder why that kept happening over and over and over again. And it wasn't until about 2 years ago when I started working at the Orchard that I realized that there was more to Christianity than that. That Jesus doesn't just want me to offer my life to him a couple hours a week, that Jesus doesn't just want me to follow the rules. Jesus wants me to give him my heart, and through that he can begin to transform the world through me. If you're at Big Wednesday last week, we talked about what it looked like to make our heart good soil. And if you weren't there, that's totally cool. But I would encourage you to come in the future, because It's just such an awesome time to come and spend time with each other and see what God is doing throughout all the grades here at the Orchard. But we started to break down what it looked like when we began to give our hearts to God. He began to give us fruit through that. The fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And we begin to turn our heart to Jesus. He can begin to produce those things in us, and He begin to transform the world through us. He wants to do that through me, and He also wants to do that through you. And that's something that I'm learning every single day, that through prayer, actual prayer, like sitting down and praying for the things that I need to happen, that God begins to change the world through me and through you guys. I pray for that every single day. That God would begin to use you to support people who are depressed, that He would begin to use you for people, to give people hope who have no hope, who are hopeless, that you would begin to love the outliers, the misfits, the people who nobody else has reached out to, that you would begin to heal the people who are sick, that you would begin to give them hope again, that you would rescue those people who are lost, and you would begin to bring light into the dark places here in Tupelo, Mississippi. Because John the Baptist wasn't this extraordinary person. He was just a guy who followed God, and God used him to do incredible things. That's the good news that we celebrated a couple weeks ago at Christmas. That God would stop at nothing, that He would pour His Spirit out into broken vessels like us, and He would invite us into a story that's greater than we could ever possibly ask for or imagine on our own. And it's more exciting, it's more life-giving, and it's overall greater than anything that we've experienced before. So as we go into small group, I want you guys to think about what that looks like in your lives. The practical ways that you can start to give your heart over to Jesus so that Jesus can start to do a miraculous work through you. It's my hope and my prayer, and I'll continue to pray for each and every one of you guys every single week, that you begin to be ignited by the Holy Spirit, and He begins to do amazing things in Tupelo and Saltillo and Moorville and Pontotoc and Itawamba and all the other places throughout Northeast Mississippi that you guys travel. Because guys, this story is exciting. This is the good news, this is the gospel, that God will stop at nothing to come and redeem people who need redeeming, that He would come and reveal a better plan, a way that we can unite with Him and bring the world back to what He originally intended.